Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely epic story. Think about the early 8th century. The Maya civilization was at its absolute zenith. They were building cities so incredibly massive that early explorers, literally stumbling through the jungle, mistakenly thought they must have been built by the lost tribes of Israel or ancient Phoenicians. No way, right? But what happened next? Well, it's one of the most devastating, yet ultimately triumphant tales of change, tragedy, and pure survival in human history. We're going to unpack exactly how ancient thrones shattered and how incredible new powers emerged from the rubble. So let's get right into it.
Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. Did the Maya really just disappear? It's kind of the ultimate historical myth, isn't it? That this incredibly advanced society just vanished into thin air. Poof! But as we'll see, the truth is way more fascinating than the myth. We're looking at a gripping story of brutal transition, profound adaptation, and unparalleled resilience.
Which brings us to Section 1, the disappearing Maya myth. Early explorers were just completely baffled by the massive empty ruins they found in the southern lowlands, setting the perfect stage for this whole mystery.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this exact date right here, January 16, 910 AD. This is the very last date ever carved onto a Maya stela at the site of Itzá. It's essentially the silent end of one of humanity's brightest lights, the classic urban civilization. After this day, large-scale monumental construction just basically stops. And the frustrating part is we don't have a written confession explaining what went wrong. The books that might have contained those exact answers were later reduced to ash, and the stone monuments, well, they mostly bragged about the glorious lives of god kings, not, dropping agricultural yields. So we're left playing detective to piece together the forensic evidence of their collapse.
Moving on to Section 2, 3 Seeds of Destruction. Let's break down that forensic evidence, because much like the fall of Rome, it wasn't just one single thing that brought them down. It was a perfect storm.
Experts generally point to this catastrophic triad: unrelenting warfare, environmental deforestation, and apocalyptic drought. Now, any one of these on its own, the Maya probably could have handled it. They were incredibly innovative. They could have developed new farming methods or healed from wars over time. But when all three of these locked together, it spelled absolute disaster for the god kings. It was like a giant puzzle of doom falling perfectly into place.
Just look at this massive number, 200,000. That's what the population of the great city of Tikal skyrocketed to during this chaotic period. Why? Unrelenting warfare. As trade broke down and old alliances crumbled, intense conflicts just spiraled completely out of control. War stopped being this elite rivalry between kings and started ripping apart the daily lives of everyday people. You had hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing the burning countryside, pouring into the cities. Imagine beautiful ancient temples being smashed into rubble just to build frantic fortifications right through the middle of cities that never even needed walls before.
And compounding that massive refugee crisis was some serious environmental self-sabotage. They were clearing huge swaths of forest for fuel and plaster, which led to devastating soil erosion. It's kind of like the worst home improvement project ever. Their absolute obsession with baking massive amounts of gleaming white plaster to coat their pyramids was quite literally eroding the fragile ground right beneath their feet. The Yucatan has incredibly thin soils to begin with, so this explosive, unchecked expansion demanded clearing forest at a completely unsustainable rate.
But then comes the final fatal blow. Even though the Maya were absolute masters of water management, we're talking incredible aqueducts and cisterns, they got hit by droughts on a sheer apocalyptic scale. A 40-year drought starting in 1822, another one around 930, and then a staggering 100-year drought from 1000 to 1100 AD. I mean, think about that. Try planting corn year after year into bone-dry dirt, with war raging outside and the soil completely depleted, and literally nothing sprouts. The kings were supposed to maintain the favor of the gods to bring the rain. When they failed year after agonizing year, well, it's highly likely the starving population finally rose up in bloody revolutions, severing that divine kingship forever.
Let's move to Section 3, the Great Northern Shift, and see how this builds. Because here is the incredible plot twist. Those millions of survivors in the southern lowlands didn't just vanish into the ether, they migrated. During what we call the Terminal Classic period, northern cities like Chichén soared to major regional power. And they did it through sheer ingenious adaptation. They looked at the failed system of divine god kings and said, nope, we're done with that, replacing them with highly pragmatic ruling councils. They locked down the regional trade routes, especially for highly valuable salt, And they built awe-inspiring architectural marvels like El Castillo, the famous pyramid that creates the illusion of a wriggling serpent slithering down its stairs during the equinox. The Maya were absolutely flourishing anew, at least until a new era of natural disasters and warfare hit around the 15th century.
Which brings us to Section 4, an invisible blitzkrieg. Fast forward to 1511. This is a devastating turning point in our explainer, the arrival of the Spanish. But the conqueror's most lethal weapon wasn't made of steel. It was completely invisible.
The data here is heartbreaking but absolutely vital to understand. 90% of the native population was lost to diseases completely unknown on the continent. 90%! Smallpox, influenza, and measles launched a deadly, invisible blitzkrieg. They wreaked havoc on a scale that represents an unparalleled destruction of human life. By the time the conquistadors actually marched deep into the jungles, they were stepping into a post-apocalyptic landscape. The germs had brutally cleared the path long before the physical invasion even really began.
So let's jump into Section 5, the long jungle resistance. Because what followed those initial plagues was a gritty David versus Goliath struggle that kicked off in 1528, spearheaded by veterans of the Aztec conquest, like the Alvarado brothers.
The crucial difference in this fight was the political structure. See, the Aztecs and the Incas had these massive centralized authorities. The Spanish could essentially roll in, kidnap the king, decapitate the command structure, and take over. But the Maya? They were a complex web of decentralized, fiercely independent city-states. There was no single king to capture. The Spanish literally had to conquer each city separately, one by one. And the kicker? When they finally established control over one region and moved to the next, that first one would immediately rebel right behind them. It was an absolute decentralized nightmare for the invaders.
Plus, the Maya didn't fight pitch battles like the Aztecs. They waged a relentless guerrilla-style resistance. We're talking deadly nighttime camp attacks, ingenious jungle traps, rapid hit-and-run tactics, and constant localized rebellions. The fighting in those dense, suffocating jungles was unlike anything the Spanish had ever faced. They were forced into a grueling slog for every single inch of territory. To put it in perspective, it took them 14 years after the invasion started just to establish a capital city at Mérida. 14 years! This incredibly fierce resistance ultimately culminated on March 10, 1697, with the fall of Najpatán. This was the dramatic final holdout, an island fortress city controlled by the Itzá people in northern Guatemala. Just let that sink in for a second. They held out against the might of the Spanish Empire for nearly 200 years after the massive Aztec Empire fell. 2 centuries. It finally took a heavily armed Spanish attack boat, completely outfitted with cannons and mortars, bombarding the city to break their defenses. The Itzá made a heroic last stand in their canoes, but the city was ultimately taken.
Section 6, an unbroken Maya spirit. Now, the fall of Najpatán marked the physical conquest of the Maya lands, but let's be absolutely clear about something. The conquest of the land did not mean the conquest of the people or their spirit. Not by a long shot.
History completely proves that this resistance never truly stopped. The Maya continuously challenged authorities for centuries after the quote-unquote official conquest. In 1847, the Yucatec Maya Rebellion came incredibly close to retaking the entire Yucatan Peninsula. In 1910, they fiercely rebelled against the dictatorial regime of Porfirio Diaz. And as recently as 1994, the Zapatista National Liberation Army uprising challenged Mexican authorities. It's this continuous, unbroken thread of defiance and cultural preservation that has literally spanned centuries.
Which leads us perfectly to this phenomenal number, 7 million. Today, there are over 7 million Maya living and thriving across Guatemala, southern Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, Belize, El Salvador, and Honduras. They aren't just history, they are very much the present. While some have integrated into Hispanic mestizo culture, many others continue a traditional way of life. They are actively keeping over 30 traditional Maya languages alive today, and yes, they are still counting the passing days on their ancient calendars right now as we speak.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Can a civilization truly be called collapsed if its people, its languages, and its resilient spirits survive unbroken today? The Maya are a profound testament to human survival. They've risen, they've fallen, and they've risen again. They faced apocalyptic climate disasters, devastating diseases, and relentless foreign invasions. Yet they have never truly been conquered. Their story completely shatters our traditional concept of a lost civilization.
Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer to uncover the incredible facts behind the Maya. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.